I won't run from the crushing. I'll hold on through the pain. What I lose means nothing next to what I gain. Come tear down every idol, so this heart won't stray. Don't let me stray. I just wanna be your sanctuary, a dwelling place for grace and mercy. Keep sifting me till.
Hello, Boker Tov, everybody. Welcome to the Threshing Floor. We are
Yes.
here on LambNetwork.tv, and I am with my co-host, Leonie Johnson. How you been?
I'm good.
You've been a bit of a battle lately.
Yes, a bit of a battle, but I'm a winner.
Well, true that.
I am a winner. I'm still standing.
You are more than an overcomer.
That's right. Whatever battle it was, I won. That's all that matters.
There you go. Well, it's good to have you back. Even though Milena did yeoman's work in standing in for you, it's always good to be talking with you about the things of the Lord.
Yes, amen. She did well.
Well, I'm sure she'll be delighted to hear that.
You have her well trained there, man. Or is it the other way around?
Well, it depends on what we're talking about here.
Oh my goodness. Yeah, she did well, as always.
Well, there's never a shortage of things to talk about. And when you have a calling and a passion, we were at a leadership seminar last night and listening to this couple and just describing their journey and everything that they've gone through, but what they've done. And just, the real emphasis, if I could take anything away from the whole night, it was about we have to really manage our thinking and our attitudes.
Mm-hmm.
Because that will determine everything in this life. And so few people really understand that and do that. And so they're led by their emotions. They're led by circumstances. People will say, well, under the circumstances, blah, blah, blah.
Mm-hmm.
And so the question we have, well, what are you doing there? Why would you be under the circumstances? You're supposed to be over your situations in life. You're supposed to be determining. We don't get to determine what happens in life, but we certainly get to determine what our response is going to be.
Mm-hmm.
And not a lot of people understand that. And of course, we're not being taught that. I mean, that's the last thing in the world that the control freaks who run the show want us to understand.
Mm-hmm.
So there is a malaise out there of just bad thinking and people being slaves to their emotions, and it's causing a lot of havoc in the world today.
Mm-hmm.
So
yes,
I'll get off my soapbox now.
Are you sure? Are you done already so quickly?
I didn't say I wasn't going to get back on another one. So you had a whirlwind of a season with cake orders and whatnot. How did that all go?
It went okay. It was a bit of a challenge. The economy really showed up at my doorstep. So it was a bit of a challenge, but ultimately my provider is king and owns everything, and the psalmist says, I've been young, now I'm old, yet I have never seen the righteous forsaken or their seed begging for bread. And so, as the seed of the righteous one, Yeshua, I will not beg for bread. And that was really the approach that I had to take when I saw that things were not going as previous years. But I've seen a decline since COVID. There has been a rapid and steady decline since COVID. So, in these times, we really have to trust God for our provision, just like the people of Israel did when they were in the desert of Mount Sinai. They had to trust him for that daily manna. So we have to trust him for that daily manna and know that he is the provider, and that he will come through for us. It's challenging, and it is a little unnerving, and can be even intimidating, scary, but we have to really trust him to bring in the provision.
Amen.
Yeah, and he's faithful. He is faithful. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
If you ask him for bread, he won't give you stone. He is faithful. Yeah.
Yeah. Amen. So what I wanted to talk about today is there's been something that I've been noticing that has been gaining traction out there. And when we talk about the foundations of our societies, especially in the United States, this whole idea of Judeo-Christian values. I mean, it's a term that we're all well familiar with, and, we kind of accept it as just being, part of the culture. Well, I've been watching a lot of videos lately pop up on BoobTube and other things that, you're starting to, and it's Christians. It's Christians who are promoting this idea that says that there is no such thing as Judeo-Christian values because the two of them have nothing in common whatsoever. Judaism and Christianity are two entirely separate faiths. What they believe and what they practice are mutually exclusive. And they will go so far as to say it is an offense to Christianity to tie Judaism in with it. I find I'm sighing a lot lately. I read, I listen, I watch, and you see what's going on out there. And, I always go back to, number one, what Stephen Covey, who wrote 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, said. He said, the main thing is to keep the main thing the main thing. And, Paul emphasizes that too, that we ought not to get distracted, whether it be flat earth or whether it be, whether the Sabbath is really the Sabbath or not, or whether, somehow or another, Jews forgot that, what day it fell on, or, calendars. You got all kinds of disputes out there, and the enemy's doing a wonderful job of dividing everybody. But when you start getting into stuff like this, Judeo-Christian values, and that the two of them are separate, have you come across this recently?
No, I haven't heard anyone said anything like what you just mentioned. I mean, there are other issues with Judeo-Christian values. There are other issues that I have seen and that I have experienced myself, and that my other sisters in faith have experienced, whether you're in the Messianic faith or you're in a Sunday, Messianic or non-Messianic. Let's leave it at that, because there's some people that I'm thinking of that are not from the Sunday church, but they do worship on the Sabbath. But we face other issues. We face other issues as women in ministry. And those issues would be that we are, based on Paul's comment, that we are not supposed to be teaching. So, and that is a part of Judeo Christianity. My tongue is getting tied. So that is a part of that. I'm not sure. I'm not sure that is everywhere. It is very dominant in the Messianic Jewish practice.
Yeah.
It is very dominant there. In some Sunday churches, it is there. It is not every Sunday church that embraces women in ministry. Right. So it is in other places, but I know for a fact that when it comes to Messianic Judaism, it is very dominant, and not just dominant, it is oppressive. So, but that has been my experience, and the experience of many sisters who are being stifled, suffocated, and they're not able to utilize any gifts. They're not able to respond to the calling, and oftentimes they have to leave, or they have to find another way, another place to minister, but it's usually not within their congregation.
Okay. Well, the whole issue of Judaism and Christianity being completely separate, I think, stems from the anti-Semitism that's on the rise throughout the world today. And we see it with people like Candace Owens, who was a professing believer. I mean, she's converted to Catholicism, so she's completely left the reservation as far as I'm concerned. But, at one time she was a defender of Israel, and now she is completely gone rogue and she won the anti-Semite of the year from whatever organization was presenting this. And that's no small feat, because that's a big pool of talent that you get to choose from. But when you're using your platform in order to promote canards, to promote blood libels, as it were, and turning the Christians, I mean, I see it on Telegram channels, and these are people who claim to love the Lord, and yet there's a hostility toward the nation of Israel. And the sympathy, especially in light of October 7th, and I think that's brought up a lot of the stuff that was kind of simmering under the surface. Now it is there in the open. And there's one online commentator who's, claims that Jesus Christ is his Lord and Savior, and yet he says that Israel is the big problem in the Middle East. Wow. I was just down at the museum in Toronto the other day. We went for a school field trip. And as we came out, there was a man walking in front of the wrong. And he had this sign, condemning the 16,000 children that Israel had massacred in Gaza. And that, had we learned nothing? So I approached him. I said, well, are you protesting the hostages too? And he said, well, the hostages could have been let go on October 8th if Israel had simply released a whole bunch of Palestinian prisoners. Just, how do you even respond to something that stupid? I mean,
by rolling over and laughing hysterically. Because is that even worthy of a response? Clearly, there's a disconnect. His brain is not connected. It's the wires.
No, absolutely not. I mean, you are living in delusional land.
Yes,
that is just beyond the pale. But when you have these people, and I was watching a video the other day of this I think it was a student that was asking Ben Shapiro, and he goes to a lot of university campuses and whatnot, and like Charlie Kirk. And this guy asked him, he says he's a Christian, and how can you call our values Judeo-Christian, because the two have nothing in common? And it was really interesting to see Ben's response, and he defended the term. But the reason why this student said that is because, and this is something that's very common amongst the anti-Semites in the Christian community, that they'll quote verses from the Talmud. Now, a couple months ago, I actually did a message in my Shabbat broadcast, Ruach HaEmet, that you can find here on lamnetwork.tv on Saturdays at 12 Eastern Standard. I've been going through the book of Revelation, and I did a whole series on Mystery Babylon and all the different components, and how the Catholic Church fit into that, and how Islam fit into that, and how Rabbinic Judaism fits into Mystery Babylon. And the fact that Rabbinic Judaism is in opposition to God. We see that with Paul in Romans chapter 10, verse 3. He says they have, I can testify that they have a zeal for God, but not according to knowledge. And verse 4 says that having forsaken the righteousness of God, they've created their own righteousness and denied the righteousness of Yeshua, who is the end of the law.
Mm-hmm.
Who is the goal? Yeshua is the prize, not the cessation of the law, which, is a whole other message. I cover that in here. So if you haven't got your copy of The Red Mark on God's Forehead yet, make sure you go get it. You can get the website, alttmmessianic.com, and find out how to order it. Mm-hmm. But this idea that, there's nothing in common. So I'm going to go through a couple of Talmudic verses, and this is what they'll gravitate to. So what is the Talmud, first of all? The Talmud is a collection of writings that were, the Orthodox Jewish community will call it the oral Torah. And so tradition is that Israel, or Moses, was given the instructions how to keep the commandments on Mount Sinai.
Mm-hmm.
And that the Jews carried this with them all throughout the desert wanderings and, into the land. And for 1,000 years or something like that, the oral traditions were dominant. And then at about 200 before Yeshua, they began to codify it. And so this is kind of during the intercovenantal period, right around the time of the Maccabees. And that, they began to write this stuff down. And what the Talmud essentially is, for those who aren't aware, it's a commentary on the Torah. And so it's 23 volumes. If you look at the Babylonian Talmud, there's two main translations. There is the Babylonian and the Jerusalem. Well, the Babylonian's much more accepted. It's much more comprehensive. Mm-hmm. And you have 22 volumes, and you've got these different commentaries from different rabbis and different midrashim, the stories that essentially tell us how to keep the commandments. That's the purpose of the Talmud. How do we keep God's law? Okay, the essence. So you've got 600, within the Torah, there's 606 commandments. The rabbis have added a couple. So you have 613 that are commonly spoken about as the Torah, 613 commandments. Mm-hmm. And so the Talmud is this vast commentary of different rabbinic opinions on how do we keep it. Because what the prevailing sentiment within Judaism, at least Orthodox Judaism, is God gave us the commandments and left it up to us how to figure what to do with it. So, he didn't specifically say how to keep the Shabbat. So, we have an entire volume. If I pulled it out, it's like 1,500 pages or something like that. 1,500 rules defining what is work. And so there's 39 classifications of work, which I think misses the entire point of Shabbat. I have a friend of mine. She's an Orthodox Jewish lady in Toronto. She's a real estate agent. And I was speaking to her one time, and she told me that she wasn't able to go to synagogue on Saturday because it was raining, and so she couldn't open up her umbrella because that would be work. And so I said to her, so you missed out on the worship of God because you couldn't open up an umbrella? Like it and with all sincerity, this is what she believes. And you want to talk about a system of bondage? Wow.
Well,
So, but the other thing about the Talmud, and it continued to be codified until about 300. They finished the Mishnah, and then they closed the Mishnah, and then there was a whole bunch more commentary. So then you had the Gemara that they added to it, and so you've got this whole, and it kept going, and so about 500 of the Common Era is when the Talmud was finished. And then you've got all kinds of extra writings. But I'm going to give a couple of verses that come from the Torah, or the Talmud, rather. And the Talmud is essentially a system of works-based righteousness that opposes the messiahship of Yeshua. And what they really go after is the verses about the Gentiles. Okay, I don't know if you've ever heard of any things before, but so one verse says, "Those who do good to the akum," which is a word for Gentiles, "will not rise from the dead." So this one rabbi said that if you bless the Gentiles, they will. You're not going to participate in the resurrection. Do not let anything say anything in praise of them, lest it be said how good the goy is. So, obviously an anti-Gentile sentiment. Jesus is ignominiously called Yeshu, or Yesu, which means may his name and memory be blotted out. So his proper name in Hebrew is Yeshua, which means salvation, obviously, but they reduced it down to Yesu. Another verse says, "The life of a goy and all his physical powers belong to a Jew. All things pertaining to the goyim are like a desert, and the first person to come along and take them can claim them for his own. So it's all right to steal from the Gentiles. It is permitted to deceive a goy." This is right from the Talmud. "It is okay to deceive and perjure yourself when dealing with a Gentile. Heretics, traitors, and apostates are to be thrown into a well and not rescued." And so apostates are those who, have come to faith in Yeshua. And the purpose of the Talmud is it leads Jews away from the Messiah. Mary is referred to as a prostitute, and a story about a Jewish convert raising historical figures from the dead using necromancy, and Yeshua saying his punishment in the afterlife for leading Israel astray is to boil in excrement. So the Talmud actually says that Yeshua said himself that was what his punishment was going to be. So
how could they have this in the Talmud when in the Torah it says that you should treat the foreigners? It tells you specifically how to treat foreigners, even for the farmers. You leave the hedge of your field. You put a light in your window to show that you will welcome in a stranger. Is this the same Torah that they're reading that tells you how to treat foreigners?
Well, and that's a very good point, is that the Orthodox community, they read the Talmud, not necessarily the Torah. They will reference the Torah because it's in the Talmud, but they don't actually study the Talmud, the Torah.
Well, that's the problem right there.
Well, yes, absolutely. And I was at a roundtable event, had to be over 20 years ago. I was with a friend of mine in Toronto, and so we went to this thing where there was a Orthodox, conservative, and woman Reform rabbi. And they were all sitting together, and we were all discussing. The main topic was egalitarianism within Judaism. Very important issue, apparently, to some people. And my friend and I, so I was with another Messianic believer, and she asked at some point near the end of it, she said, well, do you hold the Torah or the Talmud in higher esteem? And the Orthodox rabbi said the Talmud, because again, like I said before, God gave us the Torah and left it up to us to figure out what to do with it. So because the commandments aren't clear, we get to figure it out, and we decide how we're going to observe these things. Well,
and they would have so many different opinions on one topic.
you can have two contradictory opinions within the Talmud. Rabbi Akiva says this, but Rabbi Yehoshua says this. They might contradict each other, and both will be, of God. Because, well, you get to decide. I mean, it's just
sense.
Oh no, it doesn't make sense, and that is the condemnation. So, are there legitimate claims that the Talmud is problematic? 100%. The Talmud is a replacement for belief in Yeshua the Messiah. And so what happened in 70 AD, so when Titus is just about to wipe out Jerusalem, before he ascends, so Titus was the son of Vespasian. So Vespasian was the emperor of Rome.
Mm-hmm.
And in about 69, so it was a year before it happened, Jerusalem's under siege. And a rabbi by the name of Yochanan ben Zakkai goes to Vespasian, and he was the general at the time. And he says, you're going to become emperor. And he says, listen, yes, I understand the zealots and they're causing all the problems. He says, we're not part of that. And he says, we just want to go off, and we don't want any trouble. We just want to go off and we want to study our Judaism. And what Vespasian told him was that, well, if your prophecy comes true and I do become emperor, then I will give you, rite of passage. And they actually had to sneak Yochanan ben Zakkai out of Jerusalem, because anybody caught even talking with the Romans was executed. I mean, the Zealots did the same thing that Hamas and Hezbollah do today, that anybody even conspiring to speak with the enemy is wiped out. So it's not limited to the Muslims or by any stretch of the imagination. So Vespasian does become emperor, and his son Titus was the one who actually succeeded him a year later, because he died very shortly after that. And he was the one that razed Jerusalem to the ground. And Vespasian allowed Yochanan ben Zakkai to leave Jerusalem. And he went to a city or a town called Yavne, which is a couple of hours away. And they set up the first yeshiva there. And that began rabbinic Judaism. Because after the temple is destroyed, you no longer have the temple cult system where, you've got, sacrifices and everything else. So Judaism, the biblical Judaism, was no longer valid. You couldn't operate. Mm-hmm. And what I talk about in my book is that after the destruction of the temple, Judaism had a choice. They had two options. Either you accept the Messianic claims of Yeshua, and he is the fulfillment of the sacrificial system, mm-hmm. or you create a new religion, which is based on, and this is what they ended up doing, starting with Yochanan ben Zakkai, who is kind of the successor to the Pharisees, mm-hmm. that it's now works-based righteousness. So instead of forgiveness being obtained by the sacrifices, you now have a system based on prayer, good deeds, and fasting. And they'll go to, for instance, Hosea chapter 14:2, which says, now accept the fruit of our lips, as a replacement for the sacrificial system, which is taking that verse entirely out of context. But what's going on nowadays is that the Christians are taking these verses in Talmud and saying that, well, there is a supremacy attitude within all of Judaism, which is not true whatsoever. Just because those verses are in the Talmud, and there are some Jews who believe that, does not believe that is the case with all Judaism, and it's not the case with all Jews. Because how many Jews do you know that actually know the Talmud?
I don't know. I don't think that that's even a question that comes up when I converse with a Jew
Yeah.
as to whether or not they know the Talmud.
Now, if you have a Chabadnik, if you have a yeshiva booker or something like that, then yes, that's what they study all day long. My mother, who worked for a yeshiva for 20 years, I mean, one of the things that drove me to faith in Yeshua was her coming home and saying, this rabbi said this, and this rabbi said this. And it was like, this is all made up. Like, where are they getting this stuff from? To me, in my unregenerated, unredeemed state, my mind knew that this was a bunch of Mishigasa. It was a bunch of Bubamaises. It was a bunch of, ridiculousness. And, anybody who reads the Talmud and some of the stories, it's like, oh, gosh, like, how do you... But that doesn't mean that that is what Judaism believes. That, it's just like, within Catholicism. Not everybody believes what the Vatican says. Most Catholics are just going about their business and whatever. They don't hold to the doctrine. And Judaism is not the Talmud. Right? That is a replacement. And so it is a counterfeit, and not all Jews subscribe to it. Are there Jews with supremacy attitudes? Of course there are. And I think there's a very legitimate reason for that too, in that, why do Jews think they're superior? Because just about every people and nation in the world has tried to wipe them out at some point in time or another. You would think that you were better than everybody else too, if that was the case. Is it biblical? No. Does it line up with how God sees things? No. Are we chosen because we're better than everybody else? That's not what Torah says. God says that he chose the nation of Israel because he decided that he was going to put his love upon them. As a matter of fact, Deuteronomy 7:7 said that he chose Israel because they were the least of all nations. And so if he's going to get this whole plan of action done through Israel, he's going to get the glory and nobody else. So there are a whole bunch of reasons for chosenness. There are there's a whole swath of verses that explain what chosenness means, and that we were chosen to be an or l'goyim, a light to the Gentiles. That's the name of my ministry, a light to the nations. That we were supposed to obey the commandments of God. That God was going to bless us, and then all the nations of the world were going to be, well, that's the God that we want to worship, because our block of wood isn't doing a whole lot of good for us here.
Mm-hmm.
So there's complete misconception, but to say that Judeo-Christian things is a misnomer, it doesn't exist, that it's offensive because there's no... And Ben Shapiro in his response said, you're taking those verses in Talmud out of context. He didn't explain why that was. But, my response is, and I'm going to be writing a blog article on this week, but, to say that this is, there's no connection between Judaism and Christianity, Ben Shapiro says Christianity was founded on Judaism. So just because we've got errors within Judaism today, that you have a certain segment that, Menachem Schneerson, who is the head of the Chabad Lubavitchers in New York, many proclaimed him to be the Messiah, buried him with a pager. If he was really the Messiah, I don't think he would have to page anybody to get out of the grave. Okay, I'm going to rise from the dead. Can you all let me out now?
Mm-hmm.
I think Yeshua rolled the stone away himself, or got the angels to do it, or something like that. But, there is Jewish supremacy, of course. And there are some heinous attitudes. I mean, you've got sects within the ultra-Orthodox community that are involved in some very wicked things. Of course there are. But that doesn't represent all Judaism. That doesn't represent the attitude of all Jews. Most Jews wouldn't even know these verses that I brought up. They don't think of the Gentiles that way. Are they suspicious of the Gentiles? Yes, of course they are. And you would be too. For the last 2,000 years, Jews have had to deal with highly anti-Semitic attitudes. I mean, read chapter 9 of my book here. It's ridiculous, and most of it has come from the church.
Mm-hmm.
But that doesn't mean that's representative of all Jews. It is not representative of all Judaism. And then to say that there is a severing of Judaism and Christianity, that's a plan of the devil. Because does not Paul say that you do not support the root, but the root supports you? If Judaism is the root, biblical Judaism, not rabbinic, but if biblical Judaism is the root of our faith, but this goes again to the antinomianism, the we're against the law. We had a conversation a couple weeks ago with a couple, and he just said he doesn't keep the Sabbath. He's never had a conviction to. He's not under the law. He's under grace. And every single bad theology that I deal with in my book here. I mean, the conversation I had with him was the reason why I wrote this book, because he's listed them all off. It was amazing. He did it all in one night. It's bad theology. So now you've got this hostility toward the Jews because there's a segment, and people like Candace Owens and another guy and Piers Morgan. He's been highlighting a lot of these clowns on his show, for sensationalism. And he tries to maintain a balanced approach. But why is he giving these people a platform? That all it's doing is it's stoking the fans, or stoking the flames of anti-Semitism and anti-Jewish attitudes, where now you have protests in the middle of the streets, or you have fools that are walking in front of the museum with signs decrying the 16,000 Gazan children that have been slaughtered.
Well, he gets views, and I think these type of programs, it's all about getting views. So I don't know if he's doing it deliberately to cause more problems, but I would think that he's probably doing it more so to get views. And he loves controversy sells. That's the kind of world that we live in. As soon as
100%.
There's something controversial, it sells. It makes the news faster, and it gets more views. They get more views, and that's what they're all about.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, he's decided to take that route, but I don't think it's really about him being anti-Semitic or wanting to start problems. I think it's more so because he wants views. These guys will take all kinds of actions just to be seen and be heard of and be known. So,
well, sure. Yeah, but whatever your motivation is, you're still going to be held accountable for what you do.
Oh, absolutely.
Because,
but do they care about the price that comes afterwards? They're looking at the here and now. They're not looking at the other life. They're looking at the here and now. So it's for them, it's all about the gratification that they get now, the fame and fortune that they get now. It's not about the consequences. Is not something that they're thinking of. We as believers, we think about consequences, or at least we should.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, you look at the fruit of anti-Semitism amongst the church fathers, and there's a direct line between Martin Luther and the Holocaust.
Mm-hmm.
Because he basically laid out the Nazi plan to deal with the Jews. And it came out of his frustration. I mean, think of this. Luther, who was probably the most influential theologian of the 16th century, Calvin's mixed in there, and you've got some others as well. But everybody knows Luther. I mean, he's got a whole denomination named after him. And when he came to faith, he was actually sympathetic toward the Jewish people. And he said that, well, the reason why they haven't come to faith is because we haven't preached from the Torah. And so when you start, have you not read, what Paul did? And the results that he had? That's not the issue. I mean, it's now part of it. And I actually led a Jewish man to faith when I was able to demonstrate for him, that Yeshua was the promised Messiah from the Hebrew Scripture. That's how I came to faith. Someone opened up the Old Covenant, the Tanakh. They began reading Messianic prophecy, and I said, "Oh my goodness, he's been promised." But that's by and large not, I mean, you've got organizations like Jews for Judaism that refute Isaiah 53 being about Yeshua, that refute Isaiah 9:6 being about Yeshua, that refute Zechariah 12:10. You know, the one whom they have pierced is all of Israel. So it's not a matter of just, you know, making it culturally sensitive. That's part and parcel of it. It's a blindness. It's a judicial blindness. I mean, here God is doing miracles in the desert, and Israel is still wanting to go back to Egypt. They're still building a golden calf.
Yeah.
It's the hardness of the human heart that's the issue. So Luther thinks that he's going to solve the problem of, you know, Jewish resistance to the gospel after 1500 years. And when he wasn't successful, now it's suggested that he was probably bipolar. So he was prone to some pretty violent mood swings. But he becomes very hostile to the Jewish people. And instead of, you know, going back to his previous position that, well, you know, we need to be sympathetic to them, now he becomes their enemy. And he essentially says, you know, confiscate the Talmuds and their prayer books, burn the synagogues down, drive them out, do everything. And so Hitler took the 8-point plan and he just said, kill them all off. But there was a direct line there. I mean, it's so clear. And we're doing the same thing all the time. All the time, we're doing the same thing. And it's a matter of hubris that we think that we can somehow expedite God's plan. This is the big problem I have, by the way, with ministries that help Jews make Aliyah. And I asked one guy why he did this, because, you know, first question I asked, well, are you preaching the gospel to them first? Before you send them back to Israel and where the next Holocaust is going to start from, are you preaching the gospel to them? And they said, well, you know, if the opportunity comes up, or, you know, sometimes they flat out say no. And I said, well, why are you doing it?
Mm-hmm.
And they kind of dance around. And I say, it's because, well, God tells us. I said, no, God says that he's going to bring them back. So what, in essence, you're doing is you're trying to help expedite the fulfillment of prophecy. And he couldn't deny it, because that is the primary motivation of these ministries, that by helping God, you know, fulfill his promise that he was going to bring Israel back, they're going to bring about the second coming. So you've got these things that are happening that on the surface may seem all well and good. But when you really start looking at the matters of the heart and what the motivation is, it's not about glorifying God. They think that they are, but they're not. God is the one who's going to bring Israel back to the land. You know, he doesn't need no Christian ministry to do it. So it's the same thing here, that you've got these people that are misled, who misunderstand what the whole purpose of all of this is. And by saying that Judeo-Christian isn't a thing, and that there's no connection between the two, is anti-Semitism, and goes back to what Paul was warning everybody about in Romans chapter 11.
Well, you're saying that most Christians, are you saying that most Christians that have this viewpoint, that is because they're thinking of the Talmud, or it is because of the Talmud that is being presented to them, why they have this opinion?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's not, listen, there are many Christians who love Israel. They pray for Israel. We recognize that Israel is not walking in faith. We realize that they are there problems with Israel? Absolutely there are. Is the Mossad involved in things it shouldn't be? For sure. Israel was the one who created Hamas back in the 80s. Hamas is an invention of, in part, the Israeli government, because they wanted a counter to the Palestinian, the PLO. And so what they did is they thought, or they sought in their brilliance to create and the United States creating ISIS to overthrow the Assad regime is the exact same thing. What you do is you let the genie out of the bottle. But that doesn't mean that they're still not part of God's plan. And it still doesn't mean that Israel still isn't the apple of God's eye. He says in Ezekiel 36 that he was going to bring them back to the land after their exile in unbelief. He says, I'm going to bring you back, and then I'm going to sprinkle clean water on you. So Israel, since 1948, has existed in a state of unbelief, just like it has for the past 2,000 years. But this is all part of God's plan. God is going to deal, what does Isaiah 40 say? Nachamu, nachamu ami, comfort, comfort my people, for they have paid twice for all that they have done. God is the one who disciplines Israel. It is not the church's job, and it is not the church's job to condemn Israel. We can condemn what Israel does. I am not saying that. I still have major questions about how October 7th went down. There are all kinds of things that don't line up there.
Mm-hmm.
Like, for instance, why did it take 7 hours for the IDF to respond in certain places? I think that there are elements of the Israeli government. There have been suggestions that Benjamin Netanyahu may be a 33rd degree Mason. I don't know. I know that, for instance, Yitzhak Rabin was. Yitzhak Shamir was a 32nd degree. So a lot of the leaders of the Israeli government have been Luciferians. And there's a lot of people who say Christian Zionism is the result of, number one, the Rothschilds, and number two, the Schofield Bible. And I've done a lot of preaching on this.
Mm-hmm.
But God is a Zionist. And he can use evil people to get his plan done. He's done that before.
Yes,
when he calls Nebuchadnezzar my servant, what does that mean? The most powerful king in the world served the Almighty in his purposes unknowingly. This is the amazing thing about God, is that he gets his creation to obey him even when it's not obeying him. Isn't that amazing?
He'll use a jackass if he needs to get his way done, his plans accomplished. So yes, he's not. I don't think he's a respect.
Does it every Sunday morning in pulpits across?
Only on Sundays. He doesn't do it on Shabbat.
There's a lot of donkeys on Saturdays too. So but this thing is that when we say that there's no connection between Judaism and Christianity, even Ben Shapiro, who's not a believer, is saying this is ridiculous. You don't even know your own scriptures. But it comes out of, again, this attitude that we need to condemn Israel. No, we don't. We need to pray for Israel. God says in Psalm 122, verse 6, pray for the peace of Jerusalem. May they prosper who love you. You want to prosper in this life, you'll be praying for Israel. That doesn't mean you have to accept everything that Israel does. That means you don't have to agree with everything Israel does. But you have to recognize that Israel is still the apple of God's eye, and that if you come against him, you're coming against Israel's God. Because he says, I have loved you, Jeremiah 31:3, I have loved you with an everlasting love. He will never take away his covenant. Look at the new covenant, Jeremiah 31:34. Unless the heavens above can be measured and the earth below searched out, only then will I cast off my people for all that they have done. Israel has been in rebellion against God from pretty much the time that they were formed as a nation. And, God himself says in Isaiah 65:2 that they are a stiff-necked people, which Paul reiterates. All day long, he has stretched out his hand to an obstinate people. But they're still part of his plan. Israel still centers on prophecy. And if you are a Christian, if you love the Jewish Messiah, you better love the Jewish people. not because they're lovable. But God loved you, and you weren't lovable either. See, this is what Paul is warning against in Romans chapter 11. He says, you better be careful, because if God did not spare, here, I'll read it for you. Verse 17. Here, we'll do a share screen, because people are visual.
But is it that it's most people that are most Christians or most churches, or is it that it's a few minority? Because there's always been a minority that is anti-Semitic. There has always been a minority that is anti-Semitic. So where are we getting this from? Is this a majority thing? Because I am not aware of this. And the people that worship on a Sunday that I associate with, they love Israel and they support Israel wholeheartedly and pray for Israel frequently. I don't know of them having this mindset at all.
It's a growing mindset, is what I'm saying.
A growing mindset. Okay.
Yeah, it's not representative of everybody, but you don't have any one thing representing all people in anything. But it is something that is growing. And if you take away this idea of the Judeo-Christian foundation, what they're doing is they're separating Judaism and Christianity. And so what Paul is saying is that in verse 17 of Romans 11, but if some of the branches were broken off and you being a wild olive were grafted in among them, and became a partaker of them, of the rich root of the olive tree, do not be arrogant toward the branches, but if you are arrogant, remember that it is not you who supports the root, but the root supports you. You will say then, branches were broken off so that I may be grafted in. Quite right. They were broken off in their unbelief, but you stand by your faith. Do not be conceited, but fear. For if God did not spare the natural branches, he will not spare you either. If you start thinking that somehow or another that you're better than the Jews because you have faith and they don't, you're in big trouble. Behold then the kindness and severity of God. To those who fell severity, but to you God's kindness, if you continue in his kindness. Otherwise, you also will be cut off. Oh, maybe you can lose your salvation then. And they also, if they do not continue in their belief, will be grafted in, for God is able to graft them in again. For if you were cut off from what is by nature a wild olive tree and were grafted contrary to nature into a cultivated olive tree, how much more will these who are the natural branches be grafted in to their own olive tree?
Mm-hmm.
You best be careful.
Well, is it possible that part of this attitude towards Judaism or towards the Christianity be founded in Judaism is because of the negative things that comes from Judaism, the stuff that's in the Talmud? So then, if you're faced with that, and if that's what's being thrown in your face, you're nothing but a Gentile. I remember a story that I was told where there was a man who said, well, he's thankful to God that he's not a woman, a dog, or a Gentile. And look at the category. They act very anti-women, especially in leadership, right? And so if that's what you're hearing, why would you feel good about Christianity being founded in Judaism? Why would that be something that you would want to accept, knowing that as a Gentile, you're classified as a dog and you're not good enough? And like you said, many Jews have a superiority attitude. This is why a lot of people will leave Messianic Judaism and go over into Orthodox Judaism. This need to feel that they are worthy and that they are good enough. And because when in Messianic Judaism, the Jews are highly elevated, they're almost worshipped. And everybody wants to make sure that their bloodline is somehow connected so that they can feel that they're worthy. And then in the end, they go over into Judaism, because until they become a Jew, they really don't feel that they're good enough for anything. So we have a huge problem on our hands, actually.
Yeah, but that's an attitudinal issue within the individual people, and we condemn that unequivocally. I remember years ago, I went down to a conference in Buffalo amongst the Southern Baptists. And, I was standing there with a couple of pastors. And when this one black pastor, he found out that I was Jewish, I mean, the guy almost started vibrating. And I just looked at him and I said, "Don't rub my head." I mean, you could tell it looks like, "Oh, we got a Jew here." Like, this isn't about me. So listen, are there attitudes within Judaism that are reprehensible? Yes. Are there attitudes within Messianic Judaism that aren't of God? Of course. But we do not condemn the root, the foundation. We do not say that Judaism and Christianity are two entirely separate faiths. No, they're not. Rabbinic Judaism is a lie. It is a falsehood. It is a deception. But it's all part of God's plan. And our attitude still needs to be, brethren, my heart's desire and prayer for them is that they may be saved. I cry for my unbelieving family members every day because I have buried a whole lot of them who did not know the Lord, and I know their eternity. And it grieves me to no end. And to see this kind of attitude coming out amongst Christians, condemning Israel, condemning Judaism, it's not your job to condemn. Yes, we criticize those false attitudes and we correct them. And so my first book was on a reproof of the church. My next book is a reproof of the Messianic movement and all the craziness that goes on in there. But the foundation is still of God. And that is what we need to remember. And we need to be humble about it. Because when we start rising ourselves up into the position of judge, we're in dangerous territory.
Well, it seems like both sides are wrong and both sides need to make some changes. Because I believe that the Christian church, those that are responding with anti-Semitism, a lot of them may be experiencing some negative things that's causing them to have that attitude.
Yep. So, but what you experience has no bearing on what your response should be.
Mm-hmm. But it does. It does. A lot of us, we're responding based on our experience, and we're human beings.
Yeah, but you're still going to be held accountable to that.
Yes.
So we have
all of us.
Paul says, "Be careful."
All of us.
Anyway, we've come to the end of our hour already, and want to thank everybody for joining us. Thank you, Leonie. Glad that you've been resurrected once again. And so we just bid everybody a Shavua Tov, and we'll look forward to seeing you next week right here on lamnetwork.tv for the Threshing Floor.
Have a good week.
Bye-bye, everybody.
I won't run from the crushing. I'll hold on through the pain. What I lose means nothing.
If you missed today's show or want to watch it again, or want to tell someone where they can watch this episode, go to lamnetwork.tv, where you can find this show and all the other live Lamb Show archives in the on-demand section of the website. Thank you for watching, and don't forget to tell someone about the Messianic Lamb Network.
I just wanna be your sanctuary.